honor for me to chair and moderate this discussion. Indeed, it is a very critical session of the series of seminars that we have been having, particular because under the guise of saying there is nothing new under the sun. So it is important to look around us, both around the world, to see what lessons can we learn from other countries who have done a similar transition as we are about to have in Eritrea. And what are the pitfalls that we have to be aware of, and how can we mitigate? And how did other countries and other societies manage or fail to manage to overcome those challenges that come both as a legacy of the previous regimes, but also that emanate during the transitional period due to the dynamics that emerges during the transitional period. And in preparation of this session, I tried to look to some countries who have similar context socially, but also in terms of political history. Of course, we Eritreans believe that Eritrea is a unique country. Indeed, it is a unique country in certain aspects, both in terms of the nature of the regime in power, but also the political history that gave rise to a particular political culture in Eritrea. So we have to be wary of those things when we try to get lessons from other societies. But I am looking forward actually for presenters to really highlight what are the main pitfalls, the common pitfalls that societies in transition face, and how did they manage to overcome them or fail to overcome them, and what are the forces of change that we need as we go forward to promote, so that the balance of power between those who resist change and those who promote change is tilted to the advantage of the change we are looking for. And identify the actors, in particular external actors. What are the roles they can play, both in terms of negative as well as positive? And then what are the socio-economic conditions that need to be quickly created in a country in transition, so that the change has a dividend in terms of economy and social stability? In order for the change, or for those who push change, gain legitimacy as quick as possible, because the question of legitimacy is very critical in transitional time. So I'm looking forward to presentations, and so I don't know whether there is a kind of an order for presenters to come forward and make their presentations.
Meron, the order is as per the brief I sent on Friday.
Yes, I see that one. And may I ask Meron Semeda to take the floor and make his contribution. And so the contribution is probably, is it 5 minutes out of them? The intervention?
So I think the first is item 3 on the brief, where Meron introduces himself and other members of the panel.
Exactly.
And that will take us about 10 minutes. And he will also explain the topic which we are about to discuss before we move to presentation at 15 in about, well, actually in about 15 minutes or so. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a question of handing the floor to Meron now.
Meron, can you take the floor, please?
Yes, Dr. Adane, thank you so much. Happy to see you first time virtually. It's you always learn from your mentors, and I can be enough grateful for your time. I know when we started it with you, Dr. Meron, and Professor George Aite. So I think we're down to 3 people presenting today, me being one of them, and then Professor George Aite and Brother Futsum. So just a little introduction about me. I am the son of Sahel. I was raised in Sahel before independence. Then after independence, I came to Karen. I did my elementary, junior and secondary school in Karen. Then I went to 18th round to Sawa. And I did my 12th grade in Sawa, but then I fled from Sawa to Sudan. Then the journey of becoming a refugee began. I moved to South Africa because there was a big number of students who went to South Africa. I don't know, Adana, if you are one of them, but there was many students that were there, and that kind of put something in my education has been one of the best in Africa, especially in South Africa. That's why I went there. I did my BA in engineering, civil engineering in South Africa. Then I started engaging with EMDHR. I was in the executive committee in 2011 and 2012. Also was leading another refugee-led organization. As a result, I came to speak on human rights and refugee plights in the United States. That's how I got to the US. Applied asylum here, and after a year I got granted asylum. Then I did my master's in international studies from the University of San Francisco, and I continue to excel on advocacy, mainly in human rights, refugee plights, also on local issues that we see, including those of nowadays in the United States with Black Lives Matter. I took my advocacy to international heights. I took many young Eritreans alongside me to places that I was able to join. And right now I do a lot of work as a community organizer in the Bay Area. I've done a lot of activities on mental health, but also in 2016, alongside with the University of San Francisco, to commemorate the 25th anniversary of independence, with the idea of bringing both opposition and government bodies on one room in one hall. To the most extent, it went well, but you know, it's very hard to get the PFDJites to come into the same room along with the opposition group. And now I work at UC Berkeley as an advisor to African scholars who come from the African continent. That is in short about me. And the next person I'm going to introduce is somebody that I look up to along with my many Eritrean mentors. He is a Ghanaian American, or Ghanaian by origin, Professor George Aite. We've been in this fight for quite some time. He's been there for a very long time, so he's a mentor that I look up to. And a little about Professor George Aite is that he's a renowned political economist who has written Defeating Dictators, African Unchained, among many of his books. And Professor George Aite, he has been on this fight against African dictators for almost his entire life. At some point, about 5-7 years ago, he was known as the 100 most influential scholars influencing African politics and economic aspects. Today, he lives in Washington, D.C., and he also has been as an advisor to former United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and to many African issues that we see, starting from Zimbabwe and many other African countries. In his home country, Ghana, he was very monumental and influential in bringing about democracy. That's why I personally believe there is a lot to gain from George Aite coming to hear his perspective, especially on the perspective of African solution for an African problem. I would like Professor George Aite to say a little more about himself a little later when he is presenting. And from here, also, I will pass it on to Brother Futsum to introduce himself.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is the floor for me? Is that how I understood it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Futsum Abraham. I have been a refugee out of Eritrea, actually, even though I grew up in Ethiopia, but since 1976, basically. My educational background is engineering. I have done electrical engineering masters, also information systems masters here in America. And I have been an activist, freelance writer, international activist, I consider myself. And thank you.
So I think next is that I think I'm going to say a few things on the approach adapted to the study, the challenge, and the caveat. When we were approached by the expert group as an expert group for this, from dictatorship to democracy, lessons from other countries, we started as a a team of me, Professor George Aite, Dr. Adane, and Dr. Miron Mikhail, who's in at Cape Town, the University of Western Cape. Now, both Dr. Adane and Dr. Miron had very influential work in many areas, but it's safe to say we had quite a difference, not just among ourselves, but also with what Eritrea Focus was expecting from us. And it took quite some time to try to come up to a common understanding. And I don't even quite 100% sure if we really nailed what was expected from us, because there was still disagreement on what was expected from us. Dr. Hafta did made it clear to many degree, but we felt there was a missing element, which is to have an African solution for an African problem, and to clearly point out step one before you move on to step two, which is step one being how do you get the regime out of power, and then move on towards the transition from other countries' experiences. So without answering step one becomes very hard to determine what we're going to talk about step two, because step two being transition depends entirely on how the regime has been removed or reformed or overthrown, all those aspects to look into. So we had that clear difference for quite some time. But having said that, through materials that we kind of brought, especially Dr. Adanes shared, and also George Aite, and through the contribution they made, we kind of looked into, I mean, more or less, my side of the article talks more about a few aspects, which is basic introduction to understanding what we are looking for from transition and the transition process from dictatorship to democracy, and learning from lessons of other countries. And we try to look at not only African countries, but also outside African countries on how they made that transition, but also defining what do we mean in transition in the case of Eritrea. How does transition originate? And when we say that, we looked at all aspects, not just the kind of transition we are looking or we are hoping in Eritrea. This was followed by triggering factors that brings about transition, and we can see this in many North African countries and in lately also in Sudan. What were the factors? What truly motivated for the transition to take place, and how do we relate that to an Eritrean situation? Following that, what we looked into is, when I say what we, with the inputs I got from both Dr. Adane and Professor George Aite, that's what I'm referring to. Following this, what we looked into was the important factors during a transition. What are the factors that really we have to hone on, we have to look into, and that makes or breaks the transition process, as Adana was talking about, forces of change, pitfalls, how they succeeded or how they failed, kind of points. And this followed by the case study of certain countries. We look at case study of, in my article, I looked into Tunisia, into other countries such as Egypt, Libya, the Sudan, Myanmar in Asia, and also Zimbabwe, considering the uniqueness in different countries. And again, we sum it up from all what we looked into, all these different countries, the case of Eritrea. So what would it look in the case of Eritrea? Now, this is hypothesis, mind you, and many things in the Eritrean case becomes difficult to kind of hone on or to try to say this is how we should go, because again, to a certain degree, the Eritrean situation is unique, although there is so many things that might also overlap from what we see in other countries. So this is how my article was written, and I'm open to any suggestions and ideas later on after I do the presentation. Professor George Aite has a history of fighting against dictators. He's written a book. He was sharing it earlier on with us, Defeating Dictators. That book, especially its chapter 7, clearly explains a lot of what we're going to talk today. And Brother Futsum has a lot of interest in this, and he has done his own work of research in this as well. So that is how we will be taking this event today from my end. Now, with that being said, I guess I'm the first presenter on this event. Is there room for the other presenters to say a few words?
Hapte, can you hear him?
I think, Meron, you should continue and finish your presentation, and then the others follow.
Okay, so the first presentation goes for almost about 20 minutes. So I guess we're going to share that slot between me and Professor George Aite. So I will try to finish mine within 10 minutes, although the time isn't quite correct because we started 10 minutes late. So again, in my presentation, again, like I described, that's how the analysis was taken. And for the sake of this presentation, we looked at, how did the bad transition came about in Africa? Obviously, we know the 1960s were the start of this, for many African countries, the time they start gaining their independence. And however, what we saw followed that was, although they gained through armed struggle, which ultimately led to the hard fought and won independence, like in the case of Zimbabwe, Eritrea, Libya, to mention a few, the same freedom fighters who were admired of their sacrifice and bravery become oppressors and colonizers of their own people. It's what we saw in Zimbabwe. It was what we saw in Libya. It was what we saw in Eritrea with Isaias Afwerki, Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, Muammar Gaddafi. The list goes on and on and on. However, in the past decade, especially in the past decade, we've seen the need for change. We've seen the need to face African dictators. And in the last 10 years, almost a handful of dictators were overthrown from power. And that is from mostly the will and need of and the oppression that resulted in many societies to stand for democracy, for change that they want to see. Eritreans, where are we in this? We are hungry to see that change, that transition. But then again, what are our inputs to making that transition becomes another question. So for this purpose of this, we define transition as a way how to move a country from dictatorship to democracy. That's what, when we define transition for the purpose of this paper. And again, we looked at different countries and ranging from Zimbabwe to Libya to Myanmar. So now the first part I want to look into is how does transition originate? And in what forms do transition come? One of the most popular one that we saw was revolution. We saw the Arab Spring that really sparked as a result of revolution, you could say, when people, as a result of certain igniting forces, maybe it's an increase in bread or in gas or day-to-day life or certain unique events. In the case of Mohamed Bouazizi, when he was doing normal marketing on the street and he was spot on and slapped by a female police, that sparked into him setting himself to fire, and then the entire nation erupted, and then street protests demanding change and certain action, but also demanding the fall of leaders. So revolution becomes one of the most popular in what we saw in the last 10 years, especially with the Arab Spring. And the second thing we can talk about is pressure from the diaspora community. The diaspora is known for two things. In some cases, for actively bringing about to bring change, but in some cases also disruption to the local activity that's going on in any country, in the home country. But in the case of Eritreans, what we see is diasporans are divided into two. And that means two groups are fighting against one another, and at the same time, but there is a huge movement. In fact, now it appears more than half of Eritreans are swaying towards the need for change. And it's not like everybody doesn't want change. Almost everyone wants change, except our dynamics, the fear that associated with it, the fact perhaps a lot of things are playing out. Could it be aspects of regionalism, aspects of religion, region, many unanswered questions also playing a role in this. However, it's safe to say for most Eritrean diasporans, they are actively seeking for that change, including those who are supporting the regime. It's a fear. It's the fact that what we call the opposition group are not coming together, is forcing them to distance themselves or to hang on to the regime. And that is mainly out of fear. The third point you look at is pressure from the international community. Now, in the case of, you can look at this in the case of Kosovo, Myanmar, DRC, Venezuela, that's happening right now. The international community has played a very important role, including Libya, by the way, which the NATO and the US has played a major role. But it always raises a question: do we want the international community interference in our country's well-being and transition? And my personal take is no, because it always comes with some form of attachment. But we're also seeing it. The international community play a huge role in those countries, in Kosovo, Myanmar, DRC, Venezuela, and probably other countries too. Now, But we can also talk about international actors like the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, or the United Nations Human Rights Commission, which has played a major role in the case of Eritrea, bringing about many of the hidden agendas into the international community. And that has helped the exposure of what is going on in the case of Eritrea. Those also do constitute a pressure to what is already going on in the struggle to democracy. And we should appreciate the work of those institutions. They are helping us day in, day out. The other factor, the other situation to look at is government collapse. And we saw this in a form of transition in places like Somalia, where when you get to a point where the government cannot, the government is formed without any proper institution, any strong foundation, it eventually lands into government collapse. And I'm sorry to say this, but we're not far away from this. Technically, if you look, we don't have institutions in place. We don't have independent groups or opposition party or civic organization or workers union or even independent student union in Eritrea. And with all this in place and only generals in the higher position having a higher say, it leaves us with little room. But the fear of government collapse in Eritrea, because there isn't even any institution that you can rely on tomorrow. The fact that the 1997 ratified constitution is not implemented raises also a huge issue in the case of Eritrea. But the other thing is, which we're not like in the case of Eritrea, the democratic process of end of term, which many African countries, at least a handful at the moment, are working with this kind of democratic transition, and it has been a light to witness. Obviously, most Western and European countries follow this process, and there is always a continuation of one government to the next government without any major issues. That is what we want to aspire, because the best form of transition so far we've seen is a democratic process. The other thing I want to touch into is the triggering factors in transition. So when you look at this, you look at social forces that spearhead change. Now, for example, the protest of high school students in Soweto in South Africa, that sparked to what degree apartheid is really bad in South Africa, in many places around the world. And even if we come to our own history, we saw freedom fighters and veterans and disabled veterans in Eritrea marching to the streets of Asmara and even addressing and forcing Isaias of Forky to address some of their concern. And so does Asmara University students. I mean, in 2001, when there was this summer program and there was some funds from European Union, and it was distributed with a hidden amount of figure, and there was corruption playing out. Asmara University students stood up and they talked about this. And we know what happened as a result, which they were forced to go to Wira, that kind of punishment. But at least it was tried. And in the case of Tunisia, we've seen Mohamed Bouzizi setting himself to fire. The rise of the Sudanese people as the result of increase in price of bread. So they become triggering factors that just a spearhead for some change to see in any country. Some of the inputs I got here from George Aitel mentions things about how the Ghana imposed a 10% value added tax, and this sparked a protest in the country. Or in December 2010, the same thing about Mohamed Bouzizi's situation. Also, when in December 2018, street protests erupted over high cost of bread in the Sudanese government. Now, we could also mention in the case of Eritrea in November 2019, when hundreds of Eritrean students took it to the street at night and wrote things on the walls saying, we don't want to go to Sawa. Those kind of actions do bring about, or they could ignite some form of triggering factors to start a protest. But that is as far as we go in Eritrea. We throw pamphlets, we write in the walls, doors. It's not a small thing, but that's how far it went. Or it's ultimately that of the Asmara University protest or that of the veterans protest in the early 90s. Now, another area I want us to look at is forms of organization, mobilization, steering strategy, mechanisms. And when you look in the case of Eritrea, what organizations do we have inside the country? Almost none. The ones that exist, there is this women's organization, there is a student organization, and they are entirely controlled by the regime in power. So what does it say about any hope in terms of those groups coming out to stand, to seek for change or for transition? It says nothing because it's controlled by the regime. Whereas in other countries, for example, in the case of Sudan, there was a professionals association who played a major role. There was opposition parties. There was media people. Whereas in the case of Eritrea, we have none of those to a certain degree, you can say. In fact, you can say with confidentiality that, confidently, you can say we don't have any of those factors, those organizations, mobilization, to take place on the street. And one more question you would like to raise here is, do we have any group that we work with on the ground? Now, what you hear is from Harnet and that of Madrakh. But clearly, you go deep down, you dig and you try to find out more. It's just, it doesn't even feel there is a strong base on the ground. It's just probably a number of group of people throwing pamphlets or sharing information with us, those in diaspora, but we don't have this active, strong group of people in Eritrea working on any of this. And obviously we can understand why, because it's a very oppressive government was hands-on on almost every civilian. And towards the end, what I want to touch is important factors during this transition. And what we have to think about is what form of transitional process mechanism has put in place. And what would be the leadership body made of, and how long the transition period should be. Those are important factors to think about right now. But again, it goes down to what I said earlier on. When you haven't figured out how you're going to make change in this country, how are you going to bring this country from dictatorship to democracy? How are you going to get rid of this dictator in power or the regime in power? It's very hard to talk about transition should look like this, because that transition is entirely dependent on how the regime was taken out of power. So important pressing issues to look into, like immediate release of political prisoners, safety of citizens, building an inclusive transition government, national security and avoiding foreign power meddling, and then election. Those kind of steps come into play, and those are what the transition team has to talk about. And obviously ways of stability in the country. So few things I want to mention about case studies and looking at the different countries in a very brief, and I know I'm going out of time. So we look at Tunisia. Tunisia kind of gave us a shed light of this Arab Spring, and Tunisia seems to be heading in the right direction so far, because they completely revised their constitution. They had a good way of looking at what transition should look like by following the necessary steps. And today, Tunisia looks at a very better state. And this is because the people stood from day one to the last day to make real change in their country. And obviously, little credit has to be given to the military personnel for supporting the change process and allowing civilians to take on the leadership role. But let's also not forget, in the case of Tunisia, there was opposition groups in place, which is not the case in the case of Eritrea. It's a very lengthy description of how Tunisia's transition took place. I don't have enough time to go through everything here, but we also look at Egypt, and you look at Egypt, how young people stood on Tahrir Square, and that revolution of young people eventually led to election of Mohamed Morsi, but then through certain actions, and then eventually what we see in the case of Egypt is a coming of the military generals in power. So from dictatorship to another dictatorship, which you don't want to see. Basically, in the case of Egypt, the entire revolution is hijacked, and people still live in fear and dictatorship. You can say, yes.
Meron, yeah, I think those case studies may come during your response to some of the questions and the comments from participants. So if you don't mind, can I interrupt you here? And then you will come
yes,
again
yes, yes.
to respond to questions. Otherwise, we will be under pressure with time.
Okay, so we can take it now to Georgia Ayite and then Brother Filso.
Yeah, I don't know. According to the plan, there is a question and answer, is it?
Okay.
Or shall we take it all together once three of them have a... I mean, it depends.
That's what we did before. We just continue all, and then at the end, we did a couple of questions. Yeah.
So let me give the floor to Professor Aiten. I will mute mine.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, welcome, Prof.
Very clear.
How are you doing?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and also let me thank Maron. He gave a wonderful presentation. And what I would like to do is to add a few things that may be of use and helpful to the Eritrean situation. First of all, let us be clear that there are two paths to moving a country from a dictatorship to a free society. The first step is to get rid of the dictator. That is step one. And then the second step is to dismantle the dictatorship itself. The two are two separate things. Right now, it seems that we're talking about a transition, but the transition presupposes that the dictator has already been removed. Now, the way you remove a dictator will determine what kind of transition you put in place. Now, there are several ways by which you can get rid of the dictator. Well, the Arab Spring showed us that, you can remove a dictator through street protests. And then there are also other ways of removing a dictator. If you look at Zimbabwe, for example, through a military coup. But then you have to make sure that those that come, the coup leaders themselves don't transform themselves into another dictatorship. In other words, you don't want to have what I call crocodile liberators who are worse than the dictator that they removed. Okay? Now, it depends upon how you guys want to organize this thing. The first step of removing the dictator, the only way we can do that is you gotta have, as Maron said, you gotta have some group at home on the ground that you can work with. Now, this is the way we did it in Ghana. In Ghana, we set up a group called the Alliance for Change. And we decided that we only want to remove the Rawlings dictatorship through peaceful means, through the ballot box. And once we decided on removing him through the ballot box, we decided that we can only do that through an electoral alliance of all the opposition parties. So the Alliance for Change set up its ultimate goal to rope all the opposition parties into an alliance. And we did so effectively to remove Rawlings from power in 2000. So the Eritrean focus group will have to determine how to remove Afwerki from power, whether through the ballot box, whether through street protests, whether through a military coup, etc., etc. That is the first step. Now, that requires a different type of strategies. I've written about this in chapter 7 of my book, Defeating Dictators. Now, after you remove the dictator, the second step is to dismantle the dictatorship itself. Now, the second step, now this is important. I've written about this in chapter 8, after the revolution. The second step involves several reforms. That is intellectual reform, freedom, restoring intellectual freedom. Then you also have to have political reform about elections. Then you also have to have constitutional reform. Then you also have to have institutional reform. By institutional reform, you have to reform the judiciary. You have to reform the police forces, security forces, and so forth. And then the last reform that you need is economic reform. Now, what is very important is the sequence of this particular reform: intellectual reform, political reform, constitutional reform, institutional reform, and economic reform. If you don't get the sequence correct, the revolution will be hijacked. This is exactly what happened in Georgia, happened in Egypt. For example, in Egypt, okay, they removed Mubarak, but they did not put in place institutional reforms. And because they did not reform the judiciary and the military security forces, the military just came back and then hijacked the revolution or reversed the revolution. That's why the military is back in power in Egypt. So it is important that it is not enough just to remove the dictator. You have to make sure that the civil service is working, the military, okay, respects the constitution, and other types of reforms. And we can talk about that later, but it's important that we learn from the experiences of, even in Russia itself. Okay, in Russia itself, remember Gorbachev, he opened up the political process, brought about political reform and intellectual reform, freedom of expression, perestroika, and glasnost. But it did not bring about institutional reform. So what happened in Russia was that the economy was still controlled by a few oligarchs. About 8 oligarchs controlled the Russian economy. And this is what made it possible for Putin to come back and seize control over the country. So again, it is important that we recognize the type of reforms that we need to make: political reform, economic reform, institutional reform, constitutional reform. All these reforms are important. If we don't do that, then the revolution can be hijacked or reversed. So that is what needs to be done in step 2 to maintain or to sustain the revolution. But then you have step one, getting rid of the dictator. How do we get rid of the dictator? Through military coup, through street protests, through the electoral boards. How? Once we determine how, we need to have some group on the ground that we can work with. Right now, I don't think the Eritreans in the diaspora have a group, corresponding group at home that we can work with. But we should have one that is critical. So I will stop here and let somebody else also contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for concise and precise presentation. Indeed, it reinforces what Meron has elaborated in his presentation. So let me quickly give the floor to Mr. Futsum Abraham. Sir, the floor is yours. You have, I don't know how much time, but please make your inputs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate for this opportunity. And then it came at the right time when we need it most, because the next challenge immediately that we're facing is the transitional stage. But of course, because of the time limitations, I'll try to make it as short as possible, hoping there will be another opportunity to continue on this matter. When we talk about transition, there are at least 4 types of transitions known to mankind. One of them being what they call the revolutionary transitional arrangement, which doesn't promise anything. You overthrow a regime or you change a government and that's it. The society takes a chance on it. And it's impossible to process democracy in this kind of situation without a solid and extremely strong civic society and professional society on a line. Okay, so when we talk about transiting society to democracy, now we can talk about the incumbent type, the international type, and also the power sharing types that are available for us. Incumbent transitions have been successful in Africa, as experienced in Tanzania during Julius Nyerere's time, in Ghana during Rawlings' time, and also in Kenya during Mr. Moi, President Moi's era. What happened in those countries is that society transited by the willingness of the leaders. The leaders decide to transit the society peacefully and neutrally, and they use the government as a transition, as a neutral transition to sustainable democracy, which is multi-party democracy, and it worked very well in those situations. I'm not going to go into the details. So incumbent transition, as long as it's neutral, which it has to be neutral anyway, can produce sustainable democracy in a society. Okay, the second type of transition that I want to discuss is what they call international transitional processes. This kind of situation takes care of in a situation where the society cannot control the socio-political dynamics any longer. Somebody has to interfere from outside force. The United Nations did that job very well in many scenarios. I'm sorry, in my thesis, I included Tibet in this situation. I don't know how it happened, but it disregards that Tibet. But transitional process to democracy has to be neutral, as its name implies, neutral to everybody. I would define what neutrality means a little later. If I get time, I hope I would. But East Timor, the situation was extremely chaotic. You can go and refer to that yourselves because I don't have time to discuss about it. In East Timor, the internal situation was terrible. External influences and all that, civil war, hunger, this necessitated international transition into the country. And a transitional government was installed by the United Nations, and smoothly and neutrally transited the society to sustainable democracy. And as we know, the Cambodian experience under the Khmer Rouge was also so intolerant that 25% of the population destroyed. All the civic society just put to rest. The United Nations had to do something about it. Okay, I mean, I'm not even talking about the Vietnamese invasion after that. It was out of control. But the United Forces of the world installed institutional, transitional government that's neutral, and it transited that society into sustainable hybrid democracy. Okay, multi-party democracy. There are two parties in there, but under the king. No matter what, though, it worked very well. So what is here is, it's not the situation is that situations in any country can be different, can be unique, like my brother Meron said. But there is only one way to get sustainable democracy, through neutral transitional government that doesn't take sides to the political contenders and to any kind of element in the society, religious, political, whatever it is, the civic society included. Therefore, transitional governments are neutral and they produce sustainable democracy. This is what is common. The situations are different, but the means to sustainable democracy is always the same. Neutral transitional process, sustainable multi-party democracy. Okay, the last one is going to be power sharing, of course. I don't think the international thing can apply in Eritrea because I don't think we have that kind of chaotic environment unless the civic society misses the point altogether and some kind of situation is created in the country. But power sharing is probably the most possible way of doing it because incumbent transition is impossible in Eritrea. I don't think Isaias will be willing to transition the society as such. But we don't know. In any case, power sharing arrangements can happen in many different setups, like in Burundi, the Hutus and the Tutsis. They had to make a transitional coalition that's neutral at the end of the day. Both of them represented by their own parties. That coalition produced democracy in Burundi. Maybe not in its purest form, but at least ethnically represented political parties are coming to power, even after the president passed power last month. But the coronavirus, the transition went very well because the culture has been established by neutral transition. South Africa, we know, coalition had to be done between the forces of apartheid and the forces of freedom. After that, reconciliation was made. And this neutral transition produced sustainable democracy in South Africa. Now coming to Liberia, one of the finest democracies were produced, to my understanding. The government, the dictatorship had to fall down because of armed forces fighting the government. Okay? The Lurch and the Mother, the two armed forces finished the process in that country because the government collapsed and four stakeholders had to come in that political dynamics. The two forces that made the change in the government, the remnants of the government and the political parties. In this situation, in what's called the Accra Accord that they signed in Accra, four of them decided to distribute the power among them democratically, and they ended up given 25 seats. They made an assembly formed by these four forces with 25% of the seats to the political parties, and the 75 went to the people. This is what is called neutral, people's democracy, people's assembly that only guarantees political change democratically in any country. Through this neutral assembly, then a neutral executive body was formed. Okay? So neutral executive and neutral legislative should definitely end up causing free election in any society. Okay? So they achieved that. 75% of seats in assembly for the people versus 25% for the political parties. Well, when we come to Sudan, I do believe Sudan is extremely beautiful, so scientific. The success of Sudan is because of a very strong political, like what Meron said, and civic societies. Without that, the vacuum has to be filled by somebody, mainly the army, which happened in Sudan. But the SPA came up and produced a society, a movement that they themselves had to negotiate for the people directly with the army. Eventually, a transitional government was formed. Now the executive was formed. 6 from the civilians, 5 from the army. That is people's army right there. That's people's democracy right there. Because an army is usually a very politically conscious element, but politically neutral element at the same time. So you can say, because of the strength of the civic and political and then professional societies, the army succumbed to the rule of law and accepted what the people had to say. Now, completely 100% purely transitional government, neutral from the political parties, was created in Sudan. From there, they went to the assembly. And they created an assembly where 40% had to be women in the assembly. So let me go to define neutrality then. If all these governments, if sustainable democracy had to be created by neutral institutions, what is neutral? Neutral is a process by which the assembly gives 75% of its seats to the people versus the political parties. Neutral is one that has executive bodies that are neutral. Neutral meaning non-biased to the political parties. And it implies the transitional authority that treats all the sects of society equally: religious, ethnic, economic, and political. Okay? It implies empowering women, like they did, by 40% seats in the assembly in the Sudan. It also eventually has to produce free election. The free election mandate worked out under a free electoral commission, okay, that manages the political parties altogether, completely manages them by law freely. I'm talking about from registration to firing to qualification, assessment, and even to punishing them when something goes wrong. That means a neutral government has to have more power for the people than compared to the political parties, but both of them must do it at the same time. I cannot go to the Eritrean situation right now because of time. I feel sorry about this. I have to leave the stage. But we have to understand that the main thing we have to do in Eritrea, we don't have any fight. We don't have any problems there. There is no reason for the political parties to manage the process of the country's transition where all the people are living peacefully without any problem. Therefore, strong civic society is necessary in Eritrea. Outside, we don't have it inside. Strong professional society. And the meaning of transition has to be very well communicated to all the people, and between the civic and the professional societies and the political parties at the same time. Thank you. I wish I had some more time.
No. You can. I can give you another 5 minutes.
Okay, beautiful. In that sense, then, one of the things we have to do is looking at the whole thing. Okay. Only neutral transitional governments produce sustainable or multi-party democracy. Okay. And there is no any reason for Eritreans to accept anything beyond that. Okay, we have to manage the political process, the people. And the political parties have to help out. But they cannot manage it because there is conflict of interest. You cannot manage a process by which you come to power. It's impossible. Therefore, this has to be very much communicated with the political. That's all we have to do. The stakeholders here are the people in the political parties in a very peaceful society. So, but very weak civic organization, very weak professional organization will expose us to another problem. If we don't transmit this division of power, sharing power, if we don't understand how to transit the society neutrally, the political parties will have to take over. Of course, you don't blame them. They have to take over. But can they manage free election in Eritrea? That you have to answer yourself. And then they have to compete on that. It cannot work. Eritreans have to take a chance. The void has to be filled. The missing void back home, where nothing is there, everything is absolutely oppressed, must be compensated by twice the effort, by the diaspora. The minimum we can do is clear understanding between the political parties and the civic society as to how to transit the society. We still have a lot of problems coming. You know, reconciliation, for example, can take place right now. We don't have to wait. But what's going on right now is very big misunderstanding between the political parties and the civic society. Dr. Alton, you said we don't have that in Eritrea inside the country. I'm sorry to tell you, we don't have it in the country. In the community outside the country either. This is a very big dangerous situation that's going on. This gives the political parties the tendency to lead the people instead of the people leading the people. But hopefully things will change. And I hope this is not the only one to go. But we have to say that our people are exposed to extreme dangerous situations, to another dictatorship most likely, because of absence of the civic and political society. The civic and political, first of all, has to understand the neutrality of a regime, a process, as the only way to transit the society, no matter how unique we are, to transit into democracy. This has to be taken solidly. It has to be assertively communicated for us to secure democracy in our country, because changing the government may end up giving us revolutionary democracy, or what they call democratic centralism, experienced in Ethiopia, but not democracy as such, the way we want. Therefore, neutral transitional government, neutrally managed by the people, in order to produce free election, completely independently managed by the election commission of the transitional government, so that the constitutional commission can also do its job very well. Therefore, if we don't get this straight, we don't teach our people through the media about the basic concept of it, then we are in big trouble, sir. We are in very big trouble. Society is exposed to danger. Therefore, the main thing about the civic society is, without pretension, to take a position on this one. Through research, we have a lot of research materials we can share, and then take a position and say it loud. So we get to the transitional period without any confusion. Otherwise, a lot of problems will take care of themselves because of our recklessness and negligence of this extraordinarily important subject matter that decides the society's future in many different ways. And I appreciate for your patience. And I hope again that this is not the only one. Maybe we can put some more in the next.
Okay. Okay. Adane?
Yeah, but
can you hear me?
can hear.
Yeah, you can hear me, yeah? If we go until, if any of the presenters, they want to add some little bit more, and then when it is 4:30, we're going to take a break, and then we will start to all the questions and answers and whatever it is, yeah?
So I have rushed them in no way, yeah? I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much. I go back to Meron.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we still have 15 minutes, 16 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
All right.
I think we can share it between me and Georgia, and Brother Fuzo can add a little more inputs too. But, you know, as we're thinking of transition, let's not miss that first step. And because that first step is the sole guide towards that transition, that's what I really want to stress. Eritrea in the current state, we don't have political party on the ground. We have them in diaspora, too many of them, and often struggling to come together. And if we're going to do this right, if we're going to say we have active political party even in diaspora, we have to have them to talk to one another, which most of the time they don't do. We have to have them to talk to one another. We have to have them to come together strongly. We don't want to see even tomorrow, if there is an opportunity for political parties in diaspora to exercise their vision inside the country. We don't want to have one PFDJ political party against 99 Eritrean opposition political party. We saw this in Baito event in 2010, 2011 in Ethiopia when there was a gathering. All of a sudden we had about 60 organizations and political parties out of nowhere. We don't want to have that, because that would mean creating a room for the regime in Asmara. And let's get it right. Tomorrow the regime might come and say, hey, we're also going to run as a political party. And we can't say no to that, because they too are Eritreans, whether we like it or not. Can we dismantle them? As in the case of Tunisia, maybe. But right now what we know is they are the one who have that power on the ground, almost 100%. That's the power lies with them. If that is the case, so we have to get our acts right here in diaspora. Again, civic society. We have none whatsoever civic society on the ground. What we have is in diaspora. Even the ones we have in diaspora are lagging behind now. There was good times. There was a good run in the last 5 years. But today, if you look at our civic society, they too are failing behind, unlike what they have achieved in the last 10 years. You look at the main focus in most of this Arab Spring fight for change, which is the youth. Where are our youth today? They are in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and in the rest of the world. So the catalyst of change, those who would go out on the street and demand change, it doesn't mean we don't have them in Eritrea, but let's get that right as well. Most of us has fled the country, including myself. So where does that put us? It puts us in the situation of, for example, because of COVID-19 right now, what you hear of the news that comes out of word of mouth out of Eritrea is that there are military personnel in every corner of every street, in every city in Eritrea, meaning there is absolute control, absolute power of the regime again on top of the people. How about understanding our society? In what aspect is our society? Can we expect our society, the Eritreans that are inside the country, can we expect them to come out and protest? Because that's what happened in the case of Sudan over increased price of bread or increased price of petrol in some part of, like in places like Nigeria. Can we expect something like that in the case of Eritrea? Well, we had so many opportunities, missed opportunities. And you come to a point, our people live in absolute fear, and that is pretty much what it looks like moving even into the future. Well, we cannot 100% rule it out, but considering our situation, and every year, every day, every person that exists in the country wants to live. Even our parents want to live right now. That is the situation that we live with in the case of Eritrea. No student union. I mean, the one that exists is run by the government. So with all this, it leaves us with little room, but to deal with the regime in Asmara. Now, during last year event, I don't know, one of the female presenters suggested an idea of even asking Isaias to leave the country in peace. It's not the worst idea. It's something that we should have to entertain. Or like Brother Futsu mentioned, power sharing that happened in Myanmar. And then to a certain degree, it is kind of the country's heading in the route to democracy, beside what's happening to the Rohingya Muslim community. So we have to explore things that can possibly make a difference or work in the case of Eritrea. Why? Because in most cases, we can compare the situation of Eritrea to that of North Korea because it's a closed country, it's a closed regime. You don't have media, you don't have political party, you don't have any form of strong union. And in that form, you are forced to deal with the regime as much as we want to get rid of them, as much as we want to wipe them out even. But will that be possible with the current state of Eritrea? And we have to be very honest ourselves. It appears not really. It seems the generals have more power along with Isaias than any other part of the society. Everybody else is just waiting for that day. We don't know what's going to happen. Recently, there was a talk of the president might have been dead, Isaias Afwerki. Now, I asked a good friend of mine when there was too much talk about that, do we have any contingent plan in place if actually Isaias is dead? We don't know. I don't think so that exists in the case of Eritrea because, one, we don't have any institution. Had we had institution, then the institution would sustain itself, but we don't have that in the case of Eritrea. So where does this take me? This takes me to summarize it in such a way that we also have to look at the possibility of dealing with this regime as much as we don't like it. After all, they are Eritreans. Where are we going to send them? With that being said, I will move it to George Aite.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Maron, thank you very much. Oh, and I also would like to, just add a little bit to the previous presenter. He gave a very good presentation, and first of all, I think we should make it clear that we do not want any external agencies like the UN to come in and kind of put together a sort of a unity or coalition government. We want an African solution to an African problem. If you're going to wait for the international community, we'll wait forever, especially for the UN, given its record in East Timor. So I think Eritrea needs to make it clear that this is a problem that they want to solve themselves. They don't want to drag in the United Nations or any other external organization. Otherwise, it will take a very, very long time. That is my first comment. The second comment that I would like to make is that, I like to emphasize that, when you look at the transition team, it's all good to have a neutral transition team. But the thing is, we have to be careful because any group that is part of the transition would like to control it. The military, for example, always want to control the transition team for the transition to their advantage. This happened in Nigeria. It also happened in Egypt. Remember, Abdel al-Sisi. Remember, Abdel al-Sisi was part of the transition from Mubarak to democratic rule. Now look at him, he's back in power. So you have to be careful. No, we can say all we want about the neutral transition, but you have to have a group outside. Like in Sudan, you have the Professional Bodies Association that is scrutinizing the transition rules to demand that, the military spend only 2 years in power and then hand over completely to civilian rules. So you got to have some watchdog outside to look at the transition rules. So neutral transition is just not going to happen by itself. You have to have some professional body or some outside watchdog group to look at it. The same thing that happened in, say, South Africa. When they set up CODESA, for example, there was a watchdog group scrutinizing every step that they made. Same thing happened in Liberia. In 2003, there was also a watchdog group which was monitoring the transition to democratic rule. So remember that you got to have a watchdog group to monitor that transition, to make sure that whoever is in transition doesn't hijack the process like Al-Sisi did in Egypt. Often those people, it's the same thing that happened in Burundi. Remember the late, the president who just died, Nkurunziza. Yeah, he was part of the transition team. Then all of a sudden, after he served 10 years in power, he said, now that they have written a new constitution, all those years that he had served didn't count. So he wanted to serve again, stand again for president for the third term. Now, it is important. Now, he hijacked the transition. Now, it is important that when we set up a transition team, you got to have a watchdog group to hold those who are in transition to account. Put their feet to the fire and make sure that they don't hijack the process, the transition process, like Nkurunziza and Al-Sisi in Egypt did. So that is the second important point that we should make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think you have done justice to whatever topics you have tackled, and I can see in the three presentations they complement each other. In fact, they are sequential in terms of addressing that particular problem. And as Prof said, how do you remove? And Meron tackled in terms of the existence or absence of social agents in Eritrea. And he described that we are going to have a challenge precisely because there are no social agents in Eritrea, as we have seen several cases of transition that he tried to share with us. And Prof talked about the sequence. Of course, he touched on the first, how to remove dictators. And indeed, he underlined what Meron said in terms of agents of change within the society and the importance of unity and unity of purpose among the different actors. And he mentioned the case of Ghana, the Alliance for Change, I suppose. But his emphasis was on the sequences of various reforms that need to happen, one after the other. And we have to get that sequence right. That were his words. And in terms of international community role, I think two of them, in fact, three of them, have seen it not as helpful in such situation. And Mr. Futsum, I think he elaborated on four types of transition, but his main thesis was in terms of neutral transition. He defined neutral transition. He means in terms of the processes have to be non-partisan, objective, but also in terms of the actors that drive that change, that transition, have to be way outside the political parties' interests and groups. So mainly we are talking people elected directly from the people or civil society as such. So to what extent this can apply to Eritrea, we are going to discuss on this. So with that, I think it would be proper.